This is the second objective of our ecosystems, matter cycling and energy flow series on general ecology, basically. On this one, we're going to be talking about the role of decomposers in recycling nutrients in the ecosystem. So the word decomposers actually usually refers to a lot of different things, and people will use them interchangeably for all kinds of things. Technically, though, bacteria and fungi are one of the few that actually are true decomposers. But sometimes people refer to organisms such as worms and other detrivores as also being decomposers, but they're technically not. So in a test question, you have to be careful whether they mean specifically who's doing the decomposition or who's just eating on dead stuff, right? So in general, decomposers is a term that refers to organisms that feed on detritus or the dead parts of organic matter on the ecosystem. But more specifically, it's supposed to mean the ones that actually break down the matter back to nutrients. And that's a role that bacteria and fungus does more than anything else, especially bacteria. Now, detrivores, which are sometimes grouped as decomposers, are technically other organisms like fungus, mini worms, insects, scavengers that actually break down carcasses of organisms into smaller chunks, which are then broken down by true decomposers back to nutrients. Now, there is a special type of detrivore that's called scavenger, and those are opportunistic carnivores in a way. They eat on carcasses. And many predators actually act as both. You see, a wolf will definitely eat a carcass if he has a chance. All right. While others are not going to really hunt and they're going to really be opportunistic only, such as a vulture would be. While a carcass was not going to last long, though, in an ecosystem, right? So the one in the bottom here, you see it's falling apart. It's going to be consumed by lots and lots of organisms, from worms to bugs and to fungus. And eventually, those tinier pieces that they put out will be broken down by bacteria back to the nutrients that producers will need. So let's talk more about that. Before we do so, I want to point out that all of this also happens in the ocean, okay? So if say a whale dies and its carcass falls to the bottom, scavengers will come in and start eating the dead tissue of the whale, and that could take 2 years for it to happen completely. And then more opportunistic detrivores, such as the ones that I'm covering right now, like all of these bottom dwellers, will come down and eat more of it, from worms to starfish to mussels. They will break that down. Crabs, lobsters, right? They'll break that down completely. Last but not least, you're going to have more specialized worms, clams, tapeworms, which are actually going to do the very last stage of breaking down to tiny, tiny pieces, which finally bacteria will break it down even further. And that's what you see here on the right side. And this is actually a picture of a real whale carcass at the bottom, on the bottom left, which is probably in the opportunistic stage already. All right. Now, it is true that this can take a very long time in the ocean, but on land, exposed to the elements, especially in a warm environment, in a matter of weeks, the whole thing could be gone. Now, what is the role of decomposers exactly, right? So basically, if you think about it, where do the producers get the matter they need to do their job, right? Now, trees are made mostly out of the material they get from the air, from carbon dioxide that's trapped from the air. But they also require nutrients to build proteins and other macromolecules like DNA and fat and carbohydrates, which require other compounds and elements such as phosphates, nitrates, nitrites, which can be found in soil or water. But how do those get there in the first place, right? Well, they're there because the decomposers help recycle dead organic matter back to those nutrients, which will then be used by the producers, which is what this picture is basically talking about. A leaf falls from the tree, and then some of it is eaten by insects, some of it is eaten by fungus, some of it is eaten by worms, and then you get this soil full of organic compounds, which bacteria will break down back to nutrients, which the plants can actually use. All right? Now, the energy that they need mostly comes from the sun, remember phototrophs, while others can actually use other chemical processes, which are the chemotrophs living in extreme environments. But the matter they need comes from decomposers. Now, so without the decomposers, therefore, the soil will be limited, or the water, if you're talking about an aquatic ecosystem, which, by the way, aquatic ecosystems would tend to be way more limited for nutrients than terrestrial ones in a sense, because the nutrients will tend to settle down to the bottom, and only in places where the currents will scoop up nutrients from the bottom and drag it up to the top, right? Like upwelling currents, or nutrients get dumped by rivers and near the continents, both of which are more common near the continents, the upwelling and the river things. That's where you're going to have nutrient-rich environments where producers can thrive. And that's why you're going to see a lot of algae blooms and rich ecosystems near the shorelines. There are upwelling currents that can happen in the open ocean in peculiar wind scenarios. There could be temporary blooms and activity due to a dump of sediments carried by the wind into an open ocean area. But for the most part, areas near the shoreline are going to be the ones going to be rich in these nutrients in the ocean. And another thing that's interesting about the ocean is that because of water currents, the nutrients tend to spread around rather than stay in one place unless you're near the continent, right? And so it's hard for life to thrive in the open ocean. Now, in continents, in the land, as long as the soil is rich, the plants can grow on it. But for that, you need decomposers to do their job. That's partially why cold environments tend to be limited in the amount of plants that grow. It's not necessarily because of lack of sunlight, because a lot of cold environments have sunlight a lot of the year. During the summer, they have a very long exposure to sunlight. So it's not necessarily the sun that's limiting things. It could be water that's limiting things, because cold places don't get a lot of rain also, because there's not a lot of evaporation. But a lot of times, it's not the sun, it's not the water, it's the nutrients, because on the cold, decomposers work slower, and therefore, their life can't grow as fast. So decomposers are definitely very important in recycling the nutrients. Don't forget, by the way, that a lot of chain diagrams show this arrow going back. That's just matter. Energy cannot flow that way, all right? Energy is used up. And also remember that technically every single organism gets decomposed, not just the last guy, all right? So that's another important thing to point out. So producers get the matter they need primarily from the air, but also from these decomposers. Now, why is it said then that matter cycles through ecosystems, but energy flows? That's because the energy enters from the sun to power through the photosynthesis process, to power the process of making food, right, which are organic molecules, from the nutrients, and that's happening in the producers, right? Then other organisms will eat each other and pass that energy from organism to organism, and with it, pass the matter also. But the matter is cycled back to the producers by the decomposers, while the energy is not cycled back. The energy is used up for organisms to grow, reproduce, do body heat, and so most of it ends up being lost as heat to the environment. So you can see that over here, matter is cycled back to decomposers, but the energy is lost as heat to the environment. Now, the energy is not lost. It's accounted for, but it becomes a useless kind of heat that just spreads out and leaks into space, and it can't really be used by life for anything. Now, what part of the food web pyramid is consumed by decomposers? Do remember, like I just said, technically, and this diagram shows that better than the previous one, every single life form that dies gets decomposed. So in that way, all of the material from the ecosystem gets recycled back to the producers. Now, the most important types of nutrients that plants are going to need, which are acted on by decomposers to form, are nitrates, nitrites, phosphates, carbon dioxide, and water, which is on the next set of videos. We're going to be focusing on talking about each of these things in more detail as we discuss the cycles of matter on ecosystems. I'll see you there.